So this is on the specification, but it's not actually had a direct question asked about it before, and it's not very kind of specific on the specification, excuse me. So the specification states that it's physical resources and land, raw materials, equipment, machinery and vehicles. So really it's just trying to get you to think about the fact that businesses have different resources that they need to use, and there's a section on labour, so flexible working patterns and the changing sectors of production, and there's a section on finance as well, money, so sources of finance and entrepreneurs, but there's no real section on kind of physical resources. So this is, I suppose it's trying to make up for this fact, and I doubt there'd be a direct question asked about it, but there's some interesting things that you can find out about physical resources and that give you a little bit more awareness of the types of things that you should be aware of as a business student. So physical resources are just basically any resources that are used apart from staff to produce your products, in the specification it talks about kind of brownfield and greenfield sites. So this could locate or relate to location. So brownfield is any site that's previously been used by industry and may need clearing or kind of processing before you can build new things on it. So actually where Connell College was built used to be a chemicals plant actually, so the ground needed a lot of extensive clearing. But greenfield is any site which hasn't previously been built on or was used for kind of agricultural purposes. And there's some advantages and disadvantages of using kind of both sites. So greenfield's kind of new territory, so you don't need to clear any waste, and it's probably quite an attractive area, whereas you're less likely to be able to build on greenfield sites because of usually protected areas, and protesters and pressure groups may not like what you're doing and may protest. Brownfield sites are usually cheaper than greenfield site, and the government might want regeneration in the area, so they might give you a loan or government grant to help you regenerate the area. But it's usually, you know, requires a bit more processing and a bit more expensive in that way for it to be cleared up. And they're usually in slightly rundown areas as well, so maybe not as attractive. So looking at labour and capital, labour-intensive production is where you're using a larger proportion of labour, so workers, than capital, whereas capital production is where you're using more capital than labour, so very much machinery and automation there. So your advantages of capital intensive is if you're using continuous or flow production, it's usually quite cost effective because your costs of production are lower. Machinery can be precise and consistent, and it can operate, you know, 24/7. Usually more easy to manage than people, but you know, I don't know, it depends how tech savvy you are. However, it's going to be very, very expensive to set up. You need maintenance, and it can be very costly if it breaks down. It can also be quite inflexible because the machinery, you know, it's not people, they're not always very flexible, they've got to be programmed. And also it could be seen as, you know, that the machines are getting rid of people's jobs. So it could be seen as a threat. Whereas labour intensive, it's more flexible, probably much cheaper for small scale production. You can get very cheap labour in the world, in countries such as India and China and Asia. Not saying that's morally right, and probably a lot of those factories should pay their workers a lot more, but you can get cheap labour. And people are obviously creative and they can solve problems, so it's a little bit more flexible. But they can have difficulty being managed because you have to be nice to your workers. They could be unreliable. People can, you know, are free to leave an organisation. They need breaks and they need motivation a lot of the time as well. So just a brief overview of those areas of physical resources.